Both Tim Ross and Lecrae have launched successful podcasts in the last couple of years.
They haven't done it alone, though.
Which is why today we're talking to the creative director of B-Side App, the studio behind both of these shows.
We talk about how they come up with episode ideas, set design, and of course, everyone's favorite topic, the gear they're using.
Let's dive in. Well, hey there, and welcome to the Pro Church Tools Show. We're here to help you and your church navigate the biggest communication shift in 500 years. I'm Brady, your host. I'm joined as always by my co-host, it's Alexander Mills.
Hello, hello.
And we're also joined by Hector Guerrero, creative director of B-Side App. Hector, welcome to the show.
Oh my God, I love you guys already.
We appreciate it. We were introduced through Ron Starling, recent guest on the show. And so Hector and Alex and I, we're all kind of just meeting for the very first time right now, which is really exciting. Hector, churches want to start a podcast. We get questions like this all the time. Pastors want to start a podcast. We get those questions all the time. You have taken a pastor in Tim Ross and helped him start a show. You've taken a music artist in Lecrae and helped him to start a podcast. How do you prepare to start a podcast from scratch and set it up for success from the beginning?
So the first question I would submit to whoever is in creative direction helping somebody start a podcast, maybe you should ask them if you have the relational equity. Should you be starting a podcast? Do we need this podcast? And I would just, as comedic as that could sound and rude, I think it's important to be as honest as possible to get to the root of what's the why. Are we here to get a bunch of views? Are we trying to make money? It's okay if we're trying to make money and take dominion. We just need the goal, right? Just so that it's really clear from the front end, because what I've seen in the past is so many people want to start something because they see what it looks like for somebody who's famous, somebody who has a massive reach online, and they're like, that looks amazing. I like the people that they're interviewing. I like seeing all of the reach that they have in doing live shows and all of the gorgeous fame outside of it. I would always encourage whoever's producing and directing, have a really strong one-on-one that emotions are out and we can get straight to the facts of what's the reason that you as the talent even want to start having this podcast. That's my preface, because I didn't even answer your question. I gave you the worst answer ever because I didn't even give you an answer. So that's what I would preface with, and I'm going to leave my answer at that. That's what I think people should really be talking about first, and then we can get into logistics if you like.
Certainly. So let's talk about how that question was answered with Pastor Tim and with Lecrae. Obviously, relatively well-known individuals in the Christian space already. How did those two, you assisting in there, help answer the why question? And what was that answer for them? Or is it a secret answer?
Listen, no secrets out here in regards to that, bro. I'll start with Tim, especially because I've worked with Tim so closely now for the last 2 years. My dude Tim did not want to even start a podcast. He felt like the Lord told him he's just supposed to do what he's called to do as an introvert, everything outside of doing a podcast. And little did we know, I was in a room with him at his church, Embassy City, helping my friend JB Copeland interview Tim. I was making no money, and JB, my friend, wanted to interview Tim for his own podcast. And I said, hey JB, I would love to help for free. I'm losing money at this point. I'm doing it for free. I'm not renting my gear out. I hired one of my buddies, Sam Byers, to come and be a camera operator and to switch for the cameras. And I'm losing money that day, but little did I know it would introduce me to Tim. And that was one of his first podcast appearances ever. And one thing that Tim shared that the Lord told him is, as soon as we finished wrapping up that podcast, Tim said, this is how I want you to reach people. This is how I want you to reach people. And that started the whole transition for him, leaving his position as a senior pastor to just be almost full-time freelancer, Tim, because he speaks now and he does his podcast. So how I had that conversation with him is I cold called and emailed his assistant saying, I would love to help Tim in any way. I didn't send like a pitch deck or like, hey, it's going to cost this much. I really just wanted to help him. I had nothing going on for me. I wanted to help him and be a part of something powerful. And it led into this beautiful story of him telling me his philosophy and his story for the basement. So that's what made this transition easy, because there was a philosophy and a vision that was already downloaded into this guy. So as soon as he felt that he heard the Lord say, this is what I need you to do, then when I come in the picture, we can collaborate now. I'm not trying to sell him on a podcast. I'm not trying to get him hyped about it. This is an assignment that he believes he needs to do. And it was picture perfect timing that myself, this gorgeous little Mexican, comes in the picture and says, hey, I would love to help. Let me know when we can meet. And that was the start of that relationship and how the podcast began.
Understood. And from a pastor standpoint, I'd be curious your thoughts on this, because I think podcasts are obviously holding this very big space in creative culture now. And we've seen outside of the church world, any number of celebrities want to start a podcast. Celebrities, well-known figures in culture, like former President Obama, like some of the royalty, who are about as famous as they come, start podcasts, sign these massive deals, and they flop, which is kind of crazy. I think a big part of that is because maybe people expect from podcasts like a real personal and intimate look into someone's life, and maybe the royalty and former presidents aren't able to deliver that, and so it doesn't align well with the medium. But sometimes in the form of church, I'm like, okay, pastor speaks from stage 30 minutes every single week. Do we really need to hear them talk more in a podcast? And if so, how are we formulating a framework that's different to create some type of novelty or something different there? Your thoughts?
That's hilarious, bro. You're so right. Because I know there's some people who are like, do we really need this podcast? You already talk. And listen, let's remember, some pastors don't speak for 30 minutes a week. Some pastors be making that service like 3 hours.
That's right.
14 different praise breaks, 16 different offerings. It just depends on the denomination and style of church you're going to. But in regards to what you're saying about, you have big figure names, you have Obama, you have all of these massively global famous people that end up starting a podcast or doing some sort of online show outside of television, online. And for whatever reason, they can't reach anybody. And I always just go back to the simplicity of they don't even know their target audience. They're like, hey, let me go with the punches. Let me be online so I can be relative. But there's two things. I don't think most of them know their target audience, who they're talking to. Sorry about the balloons. I'm using a Mac and balloons just flew up in my screen.
Happens,
It's embarrassing, guys.
Thank God for AI.
Anyway, this is why I'm not a podcaster, okay? I'm just the guy behind the screen. So I think, for one, a lot of people don't know their audience. It don't matter how famous you are. Does not matter how big of a following you have. They don't know their audience. And then two, they aren't truly vulnerable to let others in, if that makes any sense. Because what I've learned with people online, if I can get to know the other person on the other side of that screen and really know how they're wired, really know what they believe about relationships, what they think about whatever it is personal to them, that's when I think you're able to find your target audience and connect with them. If there's no connection, if there's no vulnerability or intimacy in an online relationship, then you're just never going to find that audience. And that's why you're going to see Obama's podcast with 20,000 views. It's just not going to blow up. So that's just what I've seen. I think the people that can tell a story, bring connection, be vulnerable, and know who they're talking to, they know exactly the person that they're reaching. That's the person that's going to win. That's the person that's going to really move somebody emotionally. And that's how you activate them. That's how you get people to subscribe to you, to pay for behind your paywall for whatever extra content you're making, to go to your live show, to do whatever, to give. I just think you have to know your audience and you have to be vulnerable.
And in terms of application there, I think the favorite podcast that I have, every one of them has multiple hosts. And they'll have guests the way that we do right now, but it's always a person talking to another person. And the reason I think that that's so powerful, to the vein of vulnerability that you mentioned, Hector, is that like when Alex and I talk, people get to feel the real friendship and the years of knowing each other that we have. And so as it relates to church podcasts, if you're going to bring a pastor on, like have their wife also there. You know, Judah does this with his podcast. You could have another pastor on staff. So like you get that interplay that you normally wouldn't get from stage, because that's very much like a one to the audience type of communication. I wanted to ask about episode ideas then. So you have Tim's podcast, you've got Lecrae's podcast, you're developing other podcasts, you've got this production company and tech company. How do you keep episodes fresh, and what is kind of the pipeline for ideas? What are some frameworks that you guys have found are really successful that you return to again? I'd love for you to pull back the curtain on that front.
Dude, absolutely. So what I've learned, it really depends on the talent that you have, because you might be working with a certain, and when I say talent, I mean, it could be a pastor or the director of whatever ministry that you're helping do the pod. It really is dependent on their personality, because a lot of people, sometimes they don't want to keep up with the trends. They don't want to talk about Cat Williams. They don't want to talk about Diddy. They don't care about anything that's culturally relevant. They just want to talk about finding the peace of God. They want to talk about whatever's in their quiet time in that morning. So that, I'm going to preface with that. It really does depend, because, man, as a creative, it could be really heartbreaking where you have this massive list of ideas that you know is going to crush online. Like, you know this will get views. You bring it to them and they're like, yeah, no, I just feel like God's not saying that right now. I just feel like we're not going to talk about that. And that's fine. So I would just, as a creative, I would really self-differentiate so you don't put a lot of your identity and everything that you're doing when you present it to them, because they just might not be rocking with it, if that makes any sense. So that's what I mean by really get to know the person you're serving so that we can always meet expectations. Now, in regards to making a great episode, dude, if you're the producer and it's on you, it's on you. You have to what I do with Tim and Lecrae. Some things that we have done is we get culturally relevant topics, right? But they're pretty young and already know what's going on. So what does help is watching content alongside all of these different topics, so you can find an angle. And if you're the producer and you have a mic on the show, which like I do, you can feed them specific questions instead of just giving them a paper that says, hey, talk about Cat Williams today. Hey, talk about Joe Rogan today. It's better if you're able to preface questions, but you do have to have context to whatever topics you're bringing up. And I think outside of that, it's, again, you have to, as a producer, you'll have to build your relationship with your talent and spend time with them outside of the studio. It can't just be you show up to the studio and you press record. You got to get to know who they are, know what they jive with, what excites them, so that you can go prepared outside of the studio as you prepare your show notes.
Hector, there's a notable Canadian who famously said, the medium is the message, which is to say, like, the way that you present something says just as much about what you're trying to say as what you're actually saying. And so we're talking about these two podcasts in particular, The Basement with Tim Ross and then Lecrae's show. And objectively...
Wait. Who's the notable Canadian? I need to know who this person is.
It's a famous philosopher. He, I believe, is passed away now. Marshall McLuhan.
Yes.
Roger that. Now
Sorry. No, wait. I'm getting something. No, that was the six god Drake, actually.
I wouldn't put it past Drake to...
he just squeezed it into that last diss at Kendrick.
Yes. But your two shows that we're talking about here, The Basement with Tim and Lecrae's show,
The Deep End with Lecrae.
The message in both shows is objectively great. Like, the content is very good. But what stands out for me as someone who watches a lot of YouTube,
and me as well, like the reason we are about to ask this question is because I saw snippets of the shows on my Instagram feed come through Discovery, and I was like, wow, that looks good. Sorry, go ahead.
No, it's just like I have a 2-screen setup at work, and I have YouTube in a little corner on one screen, and I'm usually listening to a podcast or long form content, but on YouTube, because I like to watch it. And as someone who listens to podcasts and digests them most on YouTube, what's striking to me is how absolutely visually just impeccable these two shows are. They are so impressive. And so I do want to talk a little bit about set design. For longtime listeners of this show, they'll know that we recently went through a set design redesign here, and we're on YouTube for the first time in a few years. And so it's something that's been on our radar. But like Brady said, the content stopped his scroll on Instagram because of how visually striking it was. So talk to us a little bit about set design, maybe your philosophy behind set design. You know, these two shows are definitely unique as far as sets go. They have their own complexion. So talk to us a little bit about set design and maybe your approach to designing a set for a new show from scratch.
Dude, absolutely. So I'll start with Tim's. We started in a studio filming Tim's podcast, and then we quickly realized there was just too many barriers and obstacles because we're navigating with a completely different company. That's a whole studio, and we have to navigate scheduling. We have to navigate the calendar. We have to navigate people coming out of the studio or in. So if you look at the older episodes, you'll see we're in a studio. If you look now, we are literally inside of this man's house.
Yeah.
We are in his house, upstairs. His kids are running around in the back. It's a whole vibe, right? But that's only going to be some talent that you work with that will let you do that. But for us, it's been the best because we were able to buy really pretty cameras that are lightweight. We use Sony FX3s with G Master lenses.
Hey, so do we.
Giant. Oh, look at God. Huh? He made a way. And then we have a gaming PC that we run the Discord through so that we can live stream. And then everything's on wheels. The table with the chairs, the PC, the cameras, we're able to roll in and then roll out. So setup takes, honestly, maybe 6 minutes. And that's just trying to plug everything in and getting the cameras right. So for Tim, that's really it. I'm telling you, dude, we are ratchet, okay? At least for Tim's podcast. The only light we're using is the fluorescent light that's above him on the fan. And then we have a key light that goes to the side, but it looks so pretty because it's nice and warm. The other side of his face is shadowed. So that's really it. For Lecrae's, we shoot his remote. It's at his studio, Reach Records, but they do have a little bit of more of a lighting setup. But one of our directors, his name's Joshua Nunn, he literally directs from Dallas on the computer while one person is physically out there running the cameras and then being able to get everything going.
Wow.
Because the headquarters is here. We're all out here in Dallas. The only talent we have outside of Dallas is Lecrae. He's in Atlanta. So we just have to do his remote. Or last week, we went to LA and we filmed 3 podcasts back to back. We just rented an Airbnb. We rented some lighting, brought all our cameras, and we filmed interviews out there. Just because there's so much talent in LA, we were able to get three different guests within the same 2 days.
Remember when we used to rent Airbnbs and film in them? Yeah. Oh, that was such a move for us. How are you guys getting in all these studios? Like, oh, don't tell anyone.
Yeah. That is so impressive to me because we made the mistake. Go ahead.
Well, I was going to say, that's the cheat code, man. Like, again, I'm going to be all over the place. But again, what I'm inspired by now, if you're a creative and you have a talent that's willing to travel, you can get so much more guests on your show if you can travel to them. There's one guy from Barstool Sports. His name is Caleb Presley. He does Sunday mornings or Sunday shorts. Bro, he was giving his playbook. The reason that show went so big and he's able to get crazy guests is he literally flies to them and just makes it as easy as possible for the guests. And he's able to get these major guests. And that's just how we blew up. For us on The Basement, we're able to fly in most of our guests. We fly them in, we get them a hotel, we get them a car. And then the other half is we will fly to them wherever they are. So only if you have the means to do it and you can afford that, I think it's the move because you'll be able to just connect and reach with way more guests that you're dreaming of.
That's so impressive to me because we made the mistake of taking this show on the road just a couple months ago. We were on a staff retreat in the Dominican. We thought, you know what, let's do an episode by the pool. So we used the same gear, the Sony cameras, and our gear, truthfully, is pretty light. We didn't bring any lights with us, very natural light. And the recording in the Dominican went well. We got home and set everything back up in our studio. And then for the next few weeks, like something was going wrong. Something was going wrong suspiciously every week for no reason. And we looked at each other, we're like, this is why we don't travel with our gear because it just causes problems. But what's so important about that?
So what happened was like the gear haunted by like a Dominican spirit? What do you mean?
That is the only possibility because there were inexplicable things happening with these.
Like, these electrical surges is like, that only affect the camera.
Yes,
it's
nothing
like, all the
changed.
lights are fine.
Yeah. But for churches, like, and this speaks to churches who are wanting to podcast, who want to start a show, is to be flexible with your accommodations, where you film, when you film. You're proving that with these two shows we're talking about here. You're filming in Tim's house, for goodness sakes, on wheels. And that, truthfully, that matches kind of the spirit of the show, which is probably...
And what do we always say? You want what you're saying with the lens to match what you're saying in the subject matter.
Exactly.
And so if you want to have this intimate conversation with Tim where it's like, hey, this is real life, it makes total sense for the setting to be that. It would be a little bit strange if it was all buttoned up and he was in this perfect studio and then they're trying to get all ratchet, to use Hector's word. Those are misaligned.
Yeah. And so, for Lecrae as well, presumably like his home base is in Atlanta. He doesn't want to be too mobile. He's working in the studio. Well, we're gonna shoot your podcast in the studio because this is where you already are. That's congruent with his lifestyle and his schedule. And so for churches, this just works as well, right? So in whatever vision you have for your show, if you want it to be conversational, a little bit buttoned down from your Sunday service, well, how you're portraying that, again, to the medium is the message. How you're portraying that, where you're choosing to shoot that, how you're choosing to present it, says just as much about the message as what the actual message is. So I'm just so interested to hear about the behind the scenes of both of those shows that you're shooting in Tim's house. And truthfully, I gleaned that from one of the most recent episodes, the Jackie Hill Perry episode, when that's kind of how they opened the show. She's like, I'm in your house, like we're shooting this here. But to know that you're shooting that podcast with Lecrae remote, like that from across the country, that's wild.
Especially for churches, man, if this is the audience we're talking to right now, that Sunday is already so polished, right? You have live production, everything buttoned down to a T. We want to make sure we're hitting cues. People are going on stage when they're supposed to. These certain lights go up. These sermon notes are ready. The graphics ready behind the pastor. It's so buttoned up. And that's fine because you are putting on a show. You're putting on a show for the day. It's a whole live event that people are coming to. I totally get that. What I would encourage, if you're the pastor or you're a director of some ministry and you're being assigned to start a podcast, it is going to help you humanize yourself if it doesn't feel that buttoned up. If the set feels like a home or it's in a certain office, I'm not saying it needs to look ugly and be terrible, but anything you can do to humanize yourself is going to be such a win for you because you immediately get to connect to the audience, especially in today's age where the church is constantly just being like mocked and made fun of and feel like the pastors are out of reach and we can't connect with them and this and that. I think for talent, anything you can do to humanize yourself, to connect with the other person through vulnerability and intimacy, it's going to bless your whole life and it's going to give you a deeper connection to the audience so you can actually get your message out, if that makes sense.
I really want to hammer home this point because we're going to talk about gear. We've touched on that. We've talked about set design, episode ideas. We're going to get into more logistics and specifics here in a moment. But what Hector's saying, he's used the word now multiple times, vulnerability. If you're starting a podcast, if you're doing a podcast, if that access is not available, if you cannot get real on mic with people, on camera, it's not worth doing the show. Podcast mediums are dominated nowadays by the expectation that when you listen to a show, you're getting the unvarnished, real, authentic, genuine person on the other side. That's why on this show, we talk about things beyond just the typical subject matter that we might tackle on the main YouTube channel. And to speak to Sunday versus podcast, and the Sunday morning that Hector's describing, maybe you're like, well, my church doesn't have lights and we don't have that. Right, but we're all preparing for Sunday. There's almost no church that just goes in, I have not thought about what I'm going to say. We have not thought about what we're going to sing. We have not, that almost never, ever, ever happens. So you're preparing for that. Whereas when Alex and I get on this mic, we've got like 5 bullet points that we've shared with Hector because we're talking with him for the first time. And aside from that, we're kind of just letting the conversation go. And you're intuiting that through the speakers, through your headphones, through your car, because you can tell that this is not prepared and scripted the way the YouTube video is. And different audiences are going to prefer different things. You might prefer this long form content. Other folks hey, I just want 8 minutes of Brady scripting to the teleprompter the exact advice I need to help my church with social. I wanted to talk briefly, Hector, about just the way you color some of these videos. You mentioned the warm lighting in Tim's set. I'm looking at screenshots right now that we'll put on the screen of Lecrae's set, and then also what I believe might be a different set, but the colors look almost identical. Lecrae in a conversation with Michelle Williams. The tones are very warm. The texture is very warm. Is that your kind of personal style that you prefer? How'd you land on that?
So I'll go between the basement and Lecrae. For the basement, because we're pumping out so much content, we actually just use the native LUT that's inside of the FX3. We use Vivid, V-I-V-I-D, Vivid. We literally use the internal LUT, and we don't mess with the color. Because if you have your lighting right, it's going to look really pretty, no matter what. In terms of that episode you're talking about, I believe we shot that in Atlanta. Are they sitting on like a couch and it's kind of dark in the background?
It looks cozy.
Yeah. We shot that in Atlanta, and I have nothing to do with that part. That's we have a bunch of editors. We have editors in South Africa that literally color and make it gorgeous and make it amazing. So this is a part where I've already failed you, whoever's watching this, because I have no answer for you other than don't ask me. I'm not a colorist.
Well, then let's talk about what you would emphasize, and that is pulling short videos from these podcasts. You know, what we know is true about podcasting is that so many of these shows are first getting put on by people discovering them on TikTok and Instagram. You know, if you think about a show like New Heights with the Kelsey brothers. New Heights? Is that it? I think it's New Heights.
Yeah, sounds right.
The Travis and Jason show. Yeah. That was first introduced to me and many people on TikTok and Instagram. And they are now gearing up to do a massive deal with maybe Spotify, maybe Amazon, maybe Apple, because their podcast has risen to like a top 25 show in the world. I feel like there might be another reason perhaps that's contributing to this. A blonde-haired woman. Yeah. And you know, good for them.
Yeah.
Who knows how that relationship's going to go? You probably want to sell that podcast yes. while you can right now. But that show was discovered. I first discovered The Deep End with Lecrae, as I mentioned, a short clip coming across my feed. And I was struck by the visual component. And so for a creative like me, that's going to get me stopping the scroll because I recognize Lecrae and it looks beautiful.
Right.
But the reason those clips are excelling is because, sure, the recognizability of Lecrae, but also the way that you're teeing up these short clips. What's the approach that B-Side takes with, we got a 60-minute episode, a 30-minute episode. We need 1, 2, 3 short clips. How many clips are you looking for, and how do you decide?
Yeah, dude, what's going to help you, and I'll preface with this, if you're a talent or you're creative or whatever it is, clips will change your entire life. They will pay your bills for the rest of your life. Because if that's going to be the first piece of free marketing that's going to get you out into the world. The only reason the basement was able to bring in revenue and we were able to start a company is because we literally made 60 to 90 second clips. That's what brought us into the world. People knew about us and they transfer over from Instagram to YouTube and they connect with us. So I would highly encourage you. I know some people are very picky about the content that goes up. They want to be minimalist on their page. You got to do at least one clip a day, Monday through Friday. You can take the weekend off, but you have to have a consistent presence to connect with your audience because you're stewarding them. You're stewarding a platform and you need to show up every day for them. That's the game plan we did. It was really simple. In regards to picking the clips, what I would encourage whoever is behind the monitor and producing the show, what I do is I timestamp and I write down everything that is happening within the show. But at the top of it, I just type in social clip moments. And I make sure that when I know it's a banger and I know this is going to do really well online, I put 6 right up there. That way I'm going to edit them or I can pass it to my editor and they'll know exactly what to do with it. It's that simple.
We know in a discovery algorithm age, how you called it free marketing, how often these clips are coming across our social feeds and we're being introduced to new things for the first time, whether it's on Instagram Reels or TikTok. YouTube has a bit more maturity as a platform than Instagram and TikTok. And breaking through the discovery there can be a challenge, and especially because the primary way that that's done outside of Shorts is through thumbnails. Thumbnails we've talked about on this show so many times about the kind of the wave that the internet rides of thumbnails of seasonality. Mr. Beast often sets the tone, and thumbnails will go in this direction for a short season, then back. The pendulum will swing back in another direction. What is your approach to thumbnails? How are you designing your thumbnails to get attention on YouTube, to stop somebody's endless scroll on YouTube and to get some free marketing on that platform?
Dude, what's so annoying, there's this like new theme where you'll go on YouTube and you've watched every Gary Vee video ever. You watched Colin and Samir and Mr. Beast, and you've tried to get all the perfect advice. And then what I've seen, it's hilarious. I've seen these random motivational videos from random people shot on their iPhone in their room. The thumbnail is just them kind of looking like this. And then the title will be learning to let go.
Yo, we have talked about this so many times.
I love you.
So we
what is this?
I'm so glad that you're talking about this. Because, what are you getting food live delivery?
They just blessed me with it. This is a meat pie from New Zealand. Here we are.
What's happening?
Yo, where are meat pies? We're closer to Quebec than he is. I want a tortilla up in this place.
Like, they brought me a meat pie, bro.
Oh, yeah.
Lord have mercy on my soul.
He's got it in the tin foil,
right.
like
Amazing.
the ones you make as a kid.
My question is, who are they? Because if they're your coworkers, what are our coworkers doing?
They're not
there?
bringing us any meat pies.
Yeah.
That's awful.
Listen, Pete. So yeah, I've been seeing these random videos go super viral where they have a title that says "Learning to Let Go" or "Time to Move On."
Yes.
And what's so funny, even though that's really annoying for a creative, I can get why it works. Because you click the video and it's a really crappy camera, terrible lighting, but it's someone being very vulnerable, honest, open, and transparent. Like, you just can't, they already have like all the gorgeous looks in the edits. That was amazing for a long time, and we're still going to do it, right? But I've just learned, at least maybe with just Gen Z in general, they just want authenticity. So I feel like that's why a lot of that stuff has been going viral. But in regards to give you a better answer about how I do thumbnails, dude, I'm the worst, especially with Tim. If you go through the catalog of the thumbnails, I change them every single week because I'm just trying to find out what I like, trying to find out the fonts I like, the look I like. So literally every week, row is different. They're all different because I'm still figuring it out for us. Mr. Beast already found his rhythm. We're still trying to find ours.
We've talked a lot about thumbnails working in that way and kind of the pendulum swinging. I always liken it to fashion because you said, hey, people are recording a video. You're going to make it really polished. You're going to make it really grimy. You're still recording a video. So the analogy I like to use with fashion is denim. So, we grow up and we're wearing the skin tight jeans with the 1% spandex because if we don't have spandex on them, there's no way you're getting in or out of them. And then our parents, I'm rewatching Friends and Seinfeld now, and I see, Jerry or Chandler in these, really blue denim. I'm like, that is a gorgeous straight fit. I need that. That's a vintage Levi's. That's great. And then there's relaxed fit as well. And you can tell fashion is a code for values so that it's a way of non-verbally saying, like, this is what I'm about. And in the same way, what you're describing is the creative expression of different generations. We've called this the collapse of curation, and how Gen Z has been like, you know what? When I see something glossy, it looks like it has a veneer to it, I immediately register that as inauthentic. So how can I code something creatively to translate that immediately to the people I want to reach as genuine and authentic? I am going to purposefully strip down the gloss. It is going to be as raw as possible. And that now immediately registers as authentic. The irony is, you mentioned Gary Vee. He's famous for saying marketers ruin everything. Gen Z's approach to making something look natural, the way that they will purposely wait to film so that the light beam coming through the window is just on them, only, because you cannot film a cooking video if there's not an organic light beam shining on your plate of overnight oats. That is just as curated as setting up a key light. Sure. In fact, it's more curated because you can only shoot for 32 minutes per day, or else the sun's rays will go to the next window. So it's not that one is more authentic than the other, but it is so ironic and curious, I guess, paradoxical to see the shift on the pendulum from like the complete gloss to the, because we've seen those same videos, we've talked about them on the show before. And it's true, they go viral because you click on them and you're like, oh, this is real. This is definitely not staged or rehearsed at all. It's like, yeah, yes, it is. Like they still set up a camera in their room.
Yeah, absolutely. Yep.
Talk to me about the first 30 seconds of these YouTube videos. Such an important part of production. You've got a 60-minute podcast you want people to dedicate time to. How do you like to structure those first 30 seconds? Do you dive right into the show? Are you showing teases the way Colin and Samir do? I know you mentioned them.
There's what we did with Lecrae. He just interviewed Jackie Hill Perry, and it went powerful, man. It got over 500,000 views, and the first 30 to 45 seconds is exactly what you think. It's a quick in and out of certain different topics. They're just stacking on top of each other, and it feels really intense. And then it goes to the podcast. There was no ad promos or extra teasers outside of that. It was just 45-second banger to lock you in. Very simple sound design behind it with very low music, and then go straight to the podcast. So I think that is helpful. And then you see people like Shannon Sharp interviewing Cat Williams with 40 plus million views on YouTube, and they just get straight to the podcast. So I think you just have to pick and choose and have like genuine creative discernment on how you want to go about it. Some episodes, you might need a banger trailer right at the front end, and there's some where the title alone is going to sell it, right? Whatever that title is and who that guest is, you might just want to go straight into it and not do a teaser. They know what they're there for. That's why I referenced the Cat Williams one. So I think you have to tap into creative discernment on doing that, because you don't have to do it every time, especially because, again, people's minds and what they're craving is always changing every year online.
How hard is it to schedule talent?
Working with talent is, it's not too complicated when you have them locked in. Does that make any sense? Like when they've said yes and they like you and they trust you and you've made it very easy, it's great. You just have to find the date. What does take time is trying to get somebody to say yes. Like that's the one of trying to get someone to come in. I'll give you a great example. We were in Los Angeles 2 weeks ago with Lecrae, and we wanted to get George Janko on. George Janko has engaged with our content. We connected with his agency, and they were like, "Oh yeah, we love Lecrae. That would be amazing." And then trying to lock it in, it just could not happen. It was like non-existent, if that makes any sense. So that's where you're going to have to struggle, and sometimes you have to be okay with letting it go. I wish it felt like a cold sales call and you could just keep grinding and grinding to get them on. But what I've learned with talent is relationship and optics are everything, especially if you don't know them personally, because you don't want to be a try hard and scare them away. So if they don't bite after maybe the first 3 pitches, you just kind of got to walk away and let it be what it's going to be.
Yeah, we've had that recently with one church that we've invited onto the show. Everyone would know this church. And they reached out to me first, and they were like, "Hey man, love what you're doing. Could you like look at our stuff? We'd love to pick your brain." And typically I say no to those requests, but I recognize
it was
this
Hillsong,
church.
so you did it.
Right, yeah.
I'm kidding.
Who was it?
It was. Don't listen to anything he says.
I'm joking.
So I get on a call with
Did
them.
you say it was Hillsong?
I did, but it was a joke.
You did.
You should. You know what, Brady? We need to make that happen. That
There
needs to
are
happen.
ties between this church and Hillsong, but I'll tell you who it was after the call. So I get on a call with them. I'm giving them my best stuff, and they're like, "Yeah, this is great." They're taking notes. So this is a pretty common occurrence where a church wants to talk to me. Okay, great. So then after, I'm like, "Oh, we'd love to have you on our podcast. You mentioned some things," and I went down these specifics. I was like, "This and this and this and this." I was like, "I think those specific items our audience would love to hear about. They're very receptive. We'd love to do it. Reach out." We get a time on the calendar. Day of, man, this is crazy. It's actually Christmas now. It's like, yeah, it's always Christmas. It was always going to be Christmas when we booked this. Can't do it. Okay, fine. And then we reschedule. Wow, this is crazy. We actually have a book launch for the pastor. And okay, reschedule. Third time. Whoa, did you know Easter is in March this month? You're like, yes, I know.
Oh
reschedule.
My God.
And at the third time, I was like, we don't need to reschedule at this point. Like, yeah, we don't need to force it this much. Yeah. And this happens with creatives. It was kind of the reason that I asked this question is that creatives are often not really the best with their time. I work a lot with people in the business world, and business folks are very frequently good at responding. They have calendars, they have assistants, it's all locked in. You start working with a creative, and part of what makes that creative great is that they're kind of just like, I need to navigate in this free space. And if you start putting too many commitments on the creative's calendar, it actually like drains the life out of them. They know this about themselves. And so they're not as quick to respond as maybe other personality types. But when you can get them on and when you can get them talking, you can really get gold. And so sometimes it is worth mining for it. Other times, hey, you gotta just say it's time to move on.
Yeah. One of the questions that we get asked a lot by our audience, we get lots of thoughtful questions into the show. But one of the most frequent is one of the most elementary questions, but it's asked so often that I want to ask it to you as well. Folks write in and say, what gear are you using? What are you shooting your podcast with? What mics are you recording on? What audio interface are you using? How are you making your podcast look and sound so clean? And so we've answered that question for ourselves, but now I pose the question to you, Hector. What kind of gear are you using for these two shows or any of your shows? What mics do you favor? You already talked about the cameras a little bit. Talk to us a little, talk to the gearheads for a moment. Let's get real practical with it.
So I'm going to make it really very simple for you.
If you say it depends, so help me.
You can have a full podcast setup. It can sound amazing, look amazing with what I use. And I use this for both Tim and traveling. I travel with this gear in 2 backpacks as carry-ons. I never have to check my stuff.
There we go.
I'm able to get in, get out. So I use 2 Sony FX3s. And then I use a Sony a7 III just as my wide shot if I want to use it. That's if the guests get up and they do like a dance or they want to be crazy. But I almost never use that shot. It's only as a backup. And then I use is it Benro? Yeah, I use Benro tripods, the little carbon fiber ones. They're tiny, they're small, and they can fit in your backpack. I use 2 of those. Use a Rodecaster Pro 2. Then I use an ATA Mini Pro ISO. And then you have to have I forgot what the correct... There's a cable. There's a certain cable you connect to your ATEM, to your Rodecaster, and it's able to sync up all your audio and video. So when you edit, all you need to do is add an intro, outro, color it. You have a full episode within 20 minutes, right? Fully edited. So, that is literally my setup outside of the other cables, HDMI cables, USB-Cs, all that. But that is how simple I like to roll, because especially when I'm traveling with Tim, sometimes we're setting up in some random studio. We're setting up in a hotel. It's just nice to have gear I can count on that doesn't take me longer than 15 minutes to set up.
Yeah, the more complicated it becomes, the more likely something goes wrong, the more likely you do a recording with talent. You've flown all the way there. You've flown them out. And it's like, actually, this happened, which is, of course, every podcast producer's nightmare. You've been at this for a couple of years now with these shows. And the new company, Hector, I wanted to, throw an impromptu question at you. What are some of kind of the mistakes that you've made along the way that you look back at that you're saying, you know what, we learned this, perhaps wisdom you can pass on to folks so that they don't make the same mistake?
I always want to go moralistically whenever I talk about these things instead of just practical stuff, because I feel like all the answers for being like any tech question, workflow, I feel like most people can figure that out on a YouTube video. For me, the first thing that props up is I would highly encourage you to self-differentiate. I'm talking from a personal level. What I mean by that is you cannot get lost in your work. You just cannot have your identity in what you're doing, especially when you're a creative. You're a support system. You're there making someone else's dreams come true. A lot of times, if you're making really good money and that's what you want to do for a living, it can be a nice high to go off of. But when a lot of that stuff and that smoke kind of clears up, you can be stuck in a scenario where what am I doing? I want to start my own thing, but I can't because I'm tied to this. And I would just encourage you, always use that phrase in your head. Self-differentiate. Do not get lost in your craft. It's just a simple assignment that God has given you, right? All we have to do in life is make disciples. Pretty clear, pretty simple. In regards to your workflow, I would let work be work, do amazing things. And outside of that, do the other things that you feel like God has asked you to do. Because I have lost myself trying to make other people's dreams come true for talent. And I'm always left more depressed, more anxious, more unfulfilled, lost. So I would just encourage you, if you're able to do that and you're able to split both of those sectors, you won't lose yourself. You just don't, especially as a creative. How many artists do we hear, they get to the fame and the height of what they want and they still don't know who they are, right? You've heard this story since forever. So I would just really encourage you, if you're on the other side and you are producing someone else's thing, don't lose yourself in the process of it. You are far more valuable than producing someone's show, producing someone's thing. You just cannot lose yourself. It's going to affect your entire life.
Beautiful and profound words to end on, Hector. Where should we be following along with what B-Side app is up to and all the great shows that you have currently, but also in the pipeline?
MySpace.com, AOL, MSN, and Bing.com. I'm just playing. You can find me at Hector Alex Guerrero on Instagram. And then I think it's just B-Side_app is where you'll see all of our talent and all the cool things that we have coming up.
And thank you for coming on the show, Hector. And thank you, everyone, for your time, attention, and trust. We'll talk to you next week. I thought when we were going to Montreal, we'd eat a bunch of meat pies, but I haven't really come across that. Don't the Quebecois eat meat pies? Isn't that traditional Quebecois fare?
Yeah, but it's like, I think it's like your grandma makes them. You know?
Why is there not like your grandma used to make at restaurant?
Listen, you're asking good questions.